Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thaddeus Copeland. I'm with the DOE Office of Sustainability, and I'm the moderator for today's panel and discussion. So glad that you could join us on a busy Climate Week NYC for this special discussion around the state of climate education at the New York City Department of Education. I am actually work for the Department of Education. I'm the Deputy Director of Sustainability, and joined on this panel today are three other DOE employees and a professor from Teachers College. So I'm joined by the Director of Sustainability, Meredith Mcdermott. We have two educators, so you're going to hear perspectives from the elementary and the secondary high school lenses of climate education, joined by Carrie Hines, an elementary teacher in Brooklyn, and Sean Mcfadden, a high school teacher in Brooklyn. And I partner with this work is Dr. Oren Fismoni-Levy from Teachers College. So we are grateful for you spending your afternoon with us. I also wanted to say happy fall, since today is the first day of fall. If you're joining us from the Northern Hemisphere, I realize we have some people from all over the world. But wanted to also mention that and just do a little brief placemaking for why we're having this conversation. Obviously, it's Climate Week in NYC, but more broadly, climate is becoming a huge urgent issue in our modern world. For those of you that are joining us from the New York City area, you know just in the last 6 weeks, we've had a number of issues from the wildfires in California that have had an adverse reaction to our air quality in New York City, Hurricane Ida that brought immense flooding to this region. Those two are very much recent things that are in the forefront of our minds. But larger than that, these are reoccurring with stronger intensity, more frequency, and they are calling us to not only recognize that we have a climate emergency and a climate crisis, but we need to act on it and deal with it. And one of the greatest tools we have at coming to that cause and to create a state of action is through education. And as part of New York City and our 1.1 million students, we have a responsibility to that cause to make sure that we are not only teaching students about the cause of climate change, but also how students can better prepare and deal with climate change and take climate action. And so today our panel will cover all those spectrums. And we look forward to also hearing your discussion and your questions for the panel so we can also address those. The other part of the panel that's really special to our office is we are working closely with Teachers College, and Oren, you can advance to the next slide, for a number of years now, over 5 years, on our research practice partnership. And what that means is we are partnering with Teachers College to help our office understand more about what's happening with sustainability at a school level. And through that work, we are engaged in both not only crafting survey tools and instruments, but also helping us to inform strategy and action based on what we're learning from our sustainability coordinators. New York City is unique for a school district this size that we have a required and mandated position of a sustainability coordinator. There's almost 1,600 of those. And it's through those roles and that specific person that we are able to not only have a liaison to do this work in our schools and to carry out some of this strategy, but also that we're able to learn and be informed about what's happening in our school buildings so that we can get a better sense of not only how to engage and support that role, but to also have a better sense of what's happening more generally with sustainability. And so it's through this work with Teachers College and this partnership that we're able to engage in some of that research. So we're grateful for that. And with that, I'll turn it over now to Dr. Oren Fismoni-Levy, who will talk to us about some of his findings, specifically as they relate to climate education.
Thank you so much, Thad. And I'm presenting this study by myself today, but we are writing it together with my amazing doctoral student, Erika Kessler. Both of us are affiliated with the International and Comparative Education Program at Teachers College. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge, as Thad said, that this study was completed as part of the New York City Partnership for Sustainability Education, a research practice partnership between the Office of Sustainability at New York City and the Center for Sustainable Futures at Teachers College, Columbia. And I would like to thank our partners and colleagues for the valuable comments and suggestions on this presentation. I want to start first with framing the discussion about the link between climate change and education. So on the left part of the screen, you see the impact of climate change, and on the right side, you see a visual from a common class in the United States. And I would like to argue that we can think about the link between climate change and education in at least two ways. Climate change is affecting education. When we look at the research on intense heat waves and how they affect learning, or how the growing anxiety about climate change and the disappointment that youth have these days of how societies are failing them, all of this is coming to schools and affecting what is happening in schools. But education also have an impact on climate change. Education, the organization, schools, colleges, etc., have ecological footprint of the organizations and their communities. So that's a negative impact on climate. And a positive impact is that education can really empower and prepare future generations and communities to tackle the challenges that climate change will bring. So what I'm going to present to you today is a set of findings from our study. I'll give you more information in a minute, but I want us to choose to look at the data from the half full glass. I want us to look at what we find here as assets, what we are starting with, rather than looking at the empty part of the glass. So I hope that will help us with framing what I'm going to show you in a minute. We are treating education as a social infrastructure. We are building on the work of Eric Kleinberg, a colleague from NYU, and we envision the education system as a social infrastructure that is crucial for the mitigation of climate change impacts and risks. Teachers and educators play an important role in activating schools as social infrastructure, and that's why this study is focusing on them. The study objectives had two objectives, to explore what New York City educators, specifically sustainability coordinators, think about climate change and climate change education, and to identify drivers, barriers, and variations in engagement with climate change education. The data for this study is coming from two surveys run by the DOE, the Sustainability Plan of Fall 2020 and the End of Year Survey of Spring 2021. These surveys are administered to sustainability coordinators in the city. Our analytical sample for the purpose of this analysis include 1,258 respondents. And as Thad mentioned earlier, in New York City, we have a mandate for schools to appoint coordinators, and this could be teachers, assistant principals, or others. So one of the first things we had to do in this study is to define climate change to the participants. And we did it using the following text. Climate change is a long-term change in the average weather patterns that have come to define Earth's local, regional, and global climates. Climate change refers to the broader range of changes that are happening to our planet. This includes rising sea level, accelerating ice melt, and shifts in ecological processes. So basically, every respondent saw that definition before they even started the survey. The first question was, please indicate how informed you feel about climate change. And here you can see that 1 out of 5 respondents said that they are very informed, around 56% said that they are somewhat informed, and very small minority said they are neither informed or uninformed. When we asked them about the causes of global climate change, we asked two questions. How much do you think human activity, or how much do you think natural patterns are the cause or contributing to climate change? And this figure shows us some good news and some challenging news. The good news is that vast majority of sustainability coordinators in New York City attribute human activity, such as burning fossil fuels, to global climate change. However, a sizable portion of the sample, 1/3, still believe that natural patterns in the Earth environment are causing climate change. So we have some confusion about the causes. When we asked them how concerned you are about climate change, we found that 72% are very concerned, 95% somewhat concerned. So we see that vast majority are worried about climate change. And when we analyze the data comparing teachers to other groups in the sample, we found that teachers are more concerned about climate change than others. We asked teachers in the sample, do you teach about climate change? And that's where I think we have some good news to share. 31% said that they teach a special class or teach a module on climate change. This is actually a very, very large number of teachers that are doing this kind of work. In general, we found that 74% are doing any kind of teaching on climate change. So I'm suggesting we see this as an asset, as a positive news, as first indicator on this issue. We asked those that are not teachers, do you talk with students about climate change? And here we found that about 18% are frequently or often speaking with students about climate change, and we have room to grow. But again, these are all good news to start with. We asked coordinators about the perceived importance of different approaches in teaching about climate change or climate change curriculum, and we found some interesting patterns. I'm going to highlight two here. First, that there is a desire by educators to empower students to take action, and that speaks really nicely to the panel we had yesterday when we heard from youth what they want schools to do. And we also see that coordinators believe that schools should teach about the causes, the solutions, and the impact of climate change. We ask those who don't talk or don't teach why this is happening. And here we found that almost half of them are saying that it's not related to the subject they teach. And I believe this is where we have some professional development work to do with teachers to make sure that everybody see how their subject is related to climate. Climate is not only a science education topic. Finally, I'm going to show you some differences between those who teach and those who don't teach climate change in terms of opinions about the topic. And you can see here some clear patterns. For example, those who don't teach say that they don't have, are less likely to say that they have resources, or those that don't teach are more worried that parents are going to complain. So we need to do a lot of work with teachers, empowering them to think about how to approach this topic and how to make them more comfortable answering students' questions, etc. So to conclude, the challenge I'm showing you today is that educators self-report that they are informed, but they show some confusion about the cause of climate change. Educators are concerned about climate change, but they view potential harm of climate change as far from them. Educators are already engaging with climate change, and this is good news. And we found that informed and concerned educators are more likely to be engaged. We also found some clear differences between educators who are engaged and those who are not. So moving forward, this study suggests that we need additional professional development and support, resources, community, leadership, policy, and standards. All of these are needed to make sure that all educators are comfortable engaging students and school community. In short, time is running out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Oren. We're now going to go to Meredith Mcdermott, Director of Sustainability, who's going to share with us what is happening at the agency level to support this work and to move climate education forward.
Thank you, Thad. So I just shared my screen. Can we?
We got it.
Can we see this? Okay,
yeah.
Excellent. There we go. Hopefully this doesn't fly ahead in the slides too quickly. It shouldn't. So we'll do our best here. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. Just want to say thank you again to Oren and to Teachers College. I just want to really emphasize the fact that we ourselves, as the Office of Sustainability at the largest public school system, K-12 in the country, we ourselves are better informed by our partnership and collaboration with Oren and Teachers College. And because of that, we truly feel like we are better equipped to really work hand in hand with our schools and our school communities to do more of this work in a really dedicated and strategic fashion, which is becoming, as Oren mentioned, only increasingly important. So just want to thank you all for being here today. You know, we're also at a pretty staggering time when all of our public schools have reopened to students for the first time in a long time, which is kind of an overwhelming, not only a Herculean effort to in fact do and execute, but it also is just so significant in many ways. And so just want to take stock of the fact that we are reminded now more than ever that schools are really the hubs of community. They're really the hubs of change and innovation, learning, teaching, and just so many wonderful things, really true leadership. It can really start with our schools, and that's something that we take very seriously, and that's the reason we love what we do, not only doing sustainability and trying to, be able to talk about these things and do these things, but to be able to do it with our younger generations and our fabulous educators. It's a big responsibility that we have, all of us, but we now know more than ever, like I said, that schools play this huge role in communities. They also play a very huge role in the preparation, the readiness, and the engagement of every single member of our school communities as it pertains to climate action and education. Education is truly the best way for us to prepare, to be ready, and to really activate across the number of people that are required in order to make true change at this point. So, with all this being said, we talk a lot about climate. There's a lot of things in the city of New York, even if we're looking at the local context, surely there is much larger context. Looking at the New York City context, there is a lot going on in climate and sustainability. Many of these goals are landed formally through numerous local laws. There is a vast policy context. However, what I will note and highlight is the fact that though we have aggressive energy consumption reduction goals, we have aggressive and necessary greenhouse gas emissions goals. Those are all goals. Waste reduction, some of these are probably very familiar to many of you participating today. Many of these goals, they do not necessarily come kit and caboodle with climate education specific goals. So though there is a very large and complicated policy context, none of them are specific to educational standards or preparation of our teachers yet. We do anticipate there is a national trend, a growing policy context across the nation and beyond to really require climate education because of these things, but also because it is a part of the overall process. And you cannot do anything aggressively in sustainability and climate action without education. So that's one of the things that we're going to really focus on today. Our office works on a lot of different things. We're not going to talk about all of these different things. We're really going to focus specifically on climate education and the many wonderful things that are happening throughout our schools and our city, including our nonprofit and other organizational partners. Climate education the good news is, several years ago, the climate education was landed formally in the One NYC update out of the Mayor's Office of Sustainability. The specific language is in front of you to expand opportunities for climate and sustainability literacy for educators and students. The city will support local programs, organizations, and our agency to expand these resources in schools. You can read the rest of it. Those pieces, every single word in there is very symbolic of things that are required. We cannot talk about educators without talking about students. We cannot talk about students without really involving educators. If we are talking about schools, school infrastructure, operations, facilities, but really just also teaching and learning. So what we like to do as an approach at the Office of Sustainability is take our bread and butter context, our policy context, facilities and operations. We are housed within the Division of School Facilities at the Department of Education. We take that bread and butter platform and we are trying to apply it to education and training programs, resources that are made available and accessible to every single one of our schools. Quite an undertaking, and we've got a long way to go. So what are some things that we're doing? Everybody wants to hear and see about, what are students doing? We know that students in general nowadays are much more activated around the topic of climate action, sustainability, more than they ever have been in the past. Yesterday, there was a great panel discussion also hosted by Columbia that really focused on this specific topic and had members of different youth leadership councils, including the one that our office leads, who were able to speak directly to participants about the things that they are doing, the topics that they're interested in, and what actions are happening right now and why we need more people to be aware of them and to take action themselves. So a couple things that we do, like I mentioned, we do have an annual youth leadership council that's focused really, the impetus for it was really climate action. There's a growing demand for engagement in this topic at the student level. We wanted to be able to provide that opportunity to not only high school students citywide, but we also really wanted their voices to be captured in the work that we are trying to do here at the DOE. So kind of extrapolate, build upon their perspective, their voice, activate accordingly as best as we are able. So this Youth Leadership Council, we're about to enter the 4th year of it, which is pretty exciting in and of itself. We usually have about 35 members annually. And like I mentioned, we try to have diverse representation from schools, citywide, every borough. And again, different perspectives and opinions. It's something that we find to not only create an amazing YLC every year, but it really helps to drive us towards improvements and acknowledgements that climate action and education so require. So this application is now live. Again, we are recruiting our fourth cohort of our DOE Sustainability Youth Leadership Council. There is information here, just a flyer. Again, this is live. The link is now, hopefully it's on your screen. And I cannot read when the application is actually due, but it's apply. It's in October.
October 12th.
Thank you. I thought it was the 12th. Didn't want to.
Yeah.
It's blocked entirely by other things. So thanks, Dad. So again, we encourage, this is for high school students. If they are interested in climate, how can I get my school to be engaged? They might be the lone wolf at their schools. There might not be anybody else willing to talk about this. This is what this is for. And again, it is also a leadership development opportunity for students. We are working with students for the entire school year, and we're really trying to develop them as young leaders. They do not necessarily have to be experts in all of these fields. That is kind of the fun of it for all of us. The other amazing thing that I want to talk about quickly is this is something that happened a little over a year ago at this point. Is the DOE established a climate education leadership team for the first time ever. We did this in partnership with the Department of Curriculum, Instruction, and Professional Learning, most namely the Director of Science for the DOE, Greg Borman. I think Greg is here with us today. Greg has been an excellent partner with us in this work. And what this was meant to be an activating channel where we are creating the time and space officially for DOE teachers and administrators to come together to talk about how we in fact are able to transform the DOE into an entity that has climate education as a robust thing that is happening in every single classroom, in every single school community, citywide. So last year we had 35 absolutely amazing educators. You're going to get to hear from 2 of them today. 35 teachers, and we had a principal join us as well, representing different grade levels, different subject areas. We were able to get funding from the city to provide these participating teachers per session. So actually having a financial incentive associated with this, which is very exciting, not the easiest thing in the world. We also work as part of our climate education leadership team. You see our logo on the screen. We work very closely with the larger New York City Resiliency and Climate Education Task Force, which is a multi-organizational task force. It's led out of the National Wildlife Federation, but in partnership with We Act for Environmental Justice and many other wonderful organizations, both city agencies and nonprofit partners throughout the city. So just want to kind of lay the groundwork for a couple of our speakers ahead. The main goals, you will see these on the screen. We really want to take a look at the things that do exist, because like Oren alluded to and mentioned through a lot of his data collection and research, we are really able to have a much better understanding, not just anecdotal, about where teachers kind of are in general, and also much more specifically than we ever have been able to know before. What are teachers doing? Where are they teaching us? Where are they seeing opportunities for this information to be presented? So no, it is not perfect. No, it is not in every subject area. How can we evaluate where we are to be able to better determine where we need to go in order to identify opportunities to better integrate climate education across every single classroom citywide that aligns to various New York State education standards. So how do we do that? We do that through policy, we do that through committee work, and we do this through lots and lots of professional learning. So that is going to be it for me. The exciting part now is that a living, breathing example of this, Sean Mcfadden is going to go next, and he can talk to you a little bit more specifically about some work that we have been doing as it pertains to his high school and many others. John?
All right, thank you, Meredith. Hello, everyone. My name is Sean Mcfadden, and I'm going to be sharing with you all a bit about what I do in my classroom and kind of the motivation behind that. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so first, let's start with a little bit about me. I work at a school named Eagle Academy for Young Men 2 in Brownsville, Brooklyn. We are a 6 through 12 all boys school. Our demographic is primarily Black and brown boys. I have been teaching for 9 years now, and I've been teaching climate ed specifically for about 3 years. So my approach to teaching climate education, I teach a climate change course that's an elective for seniors, and I also teach AP Environmental Science. So seniors, most of them are 17 and 18. Most of them are like ready to enter the world. So they have a lot of things that are on their mind. And I talk to them about, you know, where is climate change in your priority level? And for a lot of them, it's pretty low. We actually had this conversation today in class. Some feel that it is not happening in front of them. Some feel that it's kind of hopeless. I had a student say that, you know, there's nothing that humans can do to stop it anyway. But then I do have some students that are like ready for action. So it kind of runs the gamut. So I try to enter with just connecting it to their personal lives. So how is climate change impacting me? How do I particularly contribute to climate change? What is being done to mitigate climate change, and how can I act to mitigate climate change? I also find that focusing on narratives is really powerful. It's great to have the data to show, you know, how greenhouse gas concentration has increased, how the Earth's surface temperature has increased, but I find that I get the most engagement and the most really inspiration in students when we focus on narratives, when we do role play, when we examine climate change from multiple perspectives. Students see that there is, not everybody agrees about the extent of climate change or the cause of climate change, and they have questions about why. You know, if this is the data, then why do some people feel the way that they do? And so we examine from multiple perspectives because of that. And my goal really is to enable them to be able to engage with people who are kind of on the fence about it, or who kind of don't think that it's really an important issue when it really is one of the issues of our generation. The only way that we're going to move forward is if we can like engage with others and really push this thing along. So I want to show you guys 2 specific lessons that relate to the things that I'm talking about. So connecting climate change to personal lives. This is one of my favorites, where students calculate their ecological footprint. So when we start out, the majority of my students have no idea what the term ecological footprint means, which is fine. So I start out with something that's just an even playing field for everyone. So on my screen right now, this is a cool website that I discovered in the pandemic, and I rely pretty heavily on it now. It's called Padlet. So you can see here, teenagers love to eat for the most part. and love to talk about food. So we started with just, listing the foods that you eat on an average day. So that's what they're doing here. And then I had them describe what their ideal meal was. So we had discussion about this, but then it came up, Mr. Mcfadden, what does this have to do with climate change? My diet doesn't have anything to do with climate change. So then to address that, we go to this video. This is a cool video from Vox. It is titled "The Diet That Helps Fight Climate Change." So the video goes over the difference between someone who consumes a high amount of meat, someone who consumes chicken mostly, and someone who consumes a plant-based diet. And it shows the difference in their footprint, or their the greenhouse gas emissions that result from their eating styles. So then my students see, like, wow, even making a simple choice as to what I eat can impact how much I'm contributing to climate change. So that gets a lot of buy-in. We have a great discussion usually about the things that they learned or found interesting from that video. Then we talk about the terms ecological footprint and Earth Overshoot Day, which come in handy for this next part, which is the ecological footprint calculator. So this is one of my favorite websites. It will calculate your ecological footprint. So I'm just going to step us through just so you can see. So it asks a series of questions. So how often do you eat animal-based products? So you can slide this, to make it fit for your lifestyle. How much of that food is unprocessed, unpackaged, or locally grown? So students can change the scale here. And just going through, it will give you some interesting results. So I'm just going to skip through just so I could show you guys the results. It's kind of lengthy. Okay, so the results, it shows what that particular student's Earth Overshoot Day is. If they forget what it is, there's this little information box here that pops up. And if everyone on Earth lived like, I did in the answers that I gave, then we would need 3 Earths in terms of, having enough resources. So that's one of the things. It also breaks it down a little further by consumption. It breaks down the ecological footprint versus the carbon footprint, has a bit of reflection about how they feel, and then they can explore solutions. So one of the things that I like to do with solutions, so this document is really just stepping them through and having them record what they found from the survey. One of the things that I like with solutions, though, is like, now that we have gone through this, how can you actually lower your ecological footprint? So going back to that ecological footprint, the thing that I like most is that you can control the scale. So when they see what their ecological footprint is, they can then go back and say, if I changed what I ate, or if I changed my mode of transportation, how would this impact it? So I have them do that. And then I have them try to commit to at least one thing that they're going to change for 1 week, just to see if, 1, you can stay committed to it, and 2, is this something that's feasible for you? Another thing that I do, and this one relates in terms of the narratives. So I did a climate refugees lesson, and last year was the first time that I did this, and the students were really into it. So each student gets a different character who is a climate refugee. So they read their role, they familiarize themselves with this character, and then they participate in a climate refugee convention. So basically, this was last year, so we were remote, so we worked in breakout rooms, but in this year I would do it in person, where they meet with different students, and I'd give them a few minutes where they're just kind of explaining who their character is, what their story is, and they're answering questions like, what signs of culture were apparent in your life before you were a refugee? What does a normal day in your life look like before you became a refugee? How did climate impact your life? And what do you need from the global community? One of the reasons why I like this lesson is because it humanizes the data. You know, what does 1.5 degrees of warming really look like? How does it actually impact people's lives? This gives my students insight into that. And then after that, I had them do a debrief of the activity in Padlet again by answering some of these questions. So what are some common themes regarding why people were forced out of their homes? What were some of the most surprising things? What do you need to live a life of dignity? I like to drive home like these are people, these are lives. This is not just, you know, a story. So to really get that empathy going, and what demands do you have the international community? You know, we have a responsibility to each other as humanity. And so going through these things, I think kind of one makes it more real for them, and also gives them a little bit less anxiety around it, because it's like, okay, you know what? I can make even simple changes in my life, and then that can contribute to mitigating climate change. And so I try to leave my students feeling empowered. And this year I'm going to try, now that we're back in person, to get much more involved with activism. So that is from the high school perspective. And now we are going to transfer to the elementary perspective with Carrie Hines, who is a teacher at PS 176 in Brooklyn.
Thank you so much, Sean. And hi, everybody. As Sean said, I'm Carrie. I teach at PS 176 in Diker Heights. I've been teaching there for 9 years now. I started out as a special educator, and over the past few years have transitioned my role into becoming in charge of our makerspace, which is really awesome. And I know not every elementary school or high school has the opportunity to have an entire room dedicated to that program. But within that, I went back to school a few years ago, and I received my degree in conservation biology. And part of my studies were to see how we can broaden the conversation surrounding climate change and sustainability, because it's so wonderful if we have all the experts partaking in these conversations, but it really needs to be more accessible, and how we can take the data and all the analysis and everything and bring it down to a level where we all can learn and as well as contribute. And that's what we're trying to do in the elementary school level. So 4 principles that I kind of base things off of with my students, because I teach kindergarten through 5th, and the conversation comes up a lot of, are they too young to learn about climate change? And of course, you do not want to overwhelm them with this overlying sense of dread and create a sense of despondency through this. But I'll be honest, most of our kids have heard the term climate change before, even outside of our school setting, and they are really exposed to it every single day, as well as they're going to be the ones to have to deal with the repercussions of this in the future. So with that, I usually begin weather versus climate with students. And usually K through 2, we focus more on the beauty of the natural world, finding that inspiration and appreciation for it. But as they get older, I dig a little deeper to first talk about what's the difference between weather and climate, because I feel like this is something that adults also get mixed up. And it's really important to understand, as Oren was saying before, acknowledge what climate change actually is. And with that, an easy way for students to really picture the effects of it are through observation. So this is just an example of a photo that I've used to show that the natural world is changing. And even though people think it's because of natural patterns, like this is a very short amount of time to have this much of the glaciers melt and disappear. To just kind of hone in, like, this is not normal for it to be happening at this speed. Also using data, and within our Maker Lab, we do a lot of fun projects that you'll get to see in a few minutes. But I try to emphasize with the students that as wonderful as it is to make and create, especially if we're focusing on conservation and sustainability as a theme, we really want to have some substance behind it and be able to teach people through our projects. So having students look at data on a very basic level, just to understand what changes are happening, to see if they can identify any patterns, use those basic skills, as well as the impacts on the community. I mean, living in New York City, we're right by the coast. Teaching in Brooklyn, the kids drive by water every day or walk or bike. And they even talk about the changes that they've been seeing, or the storm that we had a few weeks ago. Whose house flooded? What did you see happening on your street? Is this something that we've seen in the past couple of years and how it's changed? So with that, these are some examples of the projects that we've done that connect to climate change. So taking that information, taking that learning. So we have our Green Guardians, which is our school green team, and we meet every week. And while we focus on other aspects of sustainability, climate change has really been a driving force through it. And through that, they plan projects, but also we have time just to talk, because this can be a very heavy topic. And it's important to create a space where students can just voice their feelings, voice their concerns, share their ideas, and I may not have all the answers all the time. I definitely don't have all the answers all the time, but it makes them feel supported and open to having these conversations. It's not something taboo that they can't talk about, or it's just restricted to one class. So we also use the global goals for sustainability as really inspiration for our projects. And as you can see on the bottom left here, students created their own handprint using the global goals to think about how personally they can work towards being more sustainable, thinking about climate action, whether it be through their own actions, their families, our school building, and what they can commit to throughout the year, through whatever projects they're doing, through whatever learning is happening in the school, and make that kind of like their goal hand. And then you can scan the QR code if you want. This is really cute. Our Green Guardians and our Maker Lab actually, in 2019, we were inspired by Greta Thunberg and Fridays for Our Future, and we held our own climate rally. And the students actually planned it. We got permission to go out into the schoolyard for the afternoon. And since so many of these students were very young and couldn't attend the rally in the city, it was a really great space where they created posters, they took the microphone, they talked about why it's important to save the planet and care and learn about climate change. And you can see they did this mural about ocean acidification and the coral reefs. They have their signs, which are really beautiful. And they actually wrote a song. So if you do scan the QR code, it's the music video that they helped produce and the song that they wrote to it. And it just shows how many different forms climate change education can take, that it doesn't have to be a traditional format, that you can really integrate this into so many creative ways, whether it be through STEAM principles and a makerspace, or if it's in your first, second, third grade classroom and you're connecting it just to something that you're learning. We've done Minecraft using technology where they had to develop a sustainable city, how we can think about New York City in the next years and its impact on climate change and how we can mitigate that. So there are so many different ways that this can happen. And one of my favorite lessons that I like to do with the students, I like to get them out and moving as much as possible. Just simple where to go. And in this lesson, students are broken up into groups, and we've obviously modified it because of the current situation, just to keep everybody's health and safety at the forefront. But students are separated into groups, and I read a series of cards, and they're supposed to be different species. And as I read these scenarios, different things happen to their habitats based upon climate change. So the oceans may be rising, or their ice caps will be melting. And that's a very visual way for students to start to realize, like, oh, this is my home. Where do I go now? And then they have to migrate somewhere else, or they just have to step out of the game. And it leads to some really powerful discussions about what they're noticing over time, how in the beginning of the game, there really isn't too drastic of a change. And the same thing people sometimes claim, like, well, I'm not seeing too many effects of climate change. I don't know how true that we can agree with that, but it shows that as we further along this progression, that more and more detrimental effects will happen, and also thinking about what's going to happen to those species, what's going to happen to those landforms and habitats. And it leads to a lot of different discussions, whether it be invasive species in a habitat, then if it talks about cultures and bringing the human perspective, we live by the coast, what's going to happen to people who live by a coast, as well as thinking about the natural resources and the strain that it's going to place on certain areas. So I created this little slide, and I think we're going to be talking about this a little bit more during the question and answer session, but especially since I run the makerspace, I try to integrate different content areas into our learning based upon whatever they're doing in their homerooms and those classes, as well as to build upon the knowledge that they're doing based upon their research, reading, writing, math, whatever it may be. So you can take a screenshot of this if you want, but these are just some resources and ideas that I've compiled together over the years of projects and lessons that I've done with students that have ranged from math and looking at data and patterns and doing bar graphs, to finding some really powerful stories. Greta and the Giants is a really great one, and it has basically Greta as the heroine, and she meets these giants, which represent the greenhouse gases and climate change, and how she was brave enough to speak up, which was really powerful, being that the younger ones sometimes are like, well, I'm a kid, or people are like, why teach them at such a young age? But it shows that it really is a global effort, and that by starting them at a younger age with exposure to climate education, it can lead to more powerful thinking when they get to Sean's level of education, when they get to high school, and they can just continue to build upon it because they already have that passion and that understanding and that drive to make a change. So I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll leave it up for like another 10 seconds or so if you just want to check it out or take a screenshot. And I saw in the chat before some people were talking about the arts, and I think that's a very, very powerful way to touch upon the emotional aspects of climate change too. All right, so I am going to send it back to you, Thad. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Carrie, Sean, Meredith, and Oren. Really great to see and hear and learn about what each of you are doing, and also how this actually all connects together. I was going back originally thinking about some of Oren's original data about how 50%, there's a gap that 50% of educators don't say they don't teach or talk about climate change. And I guess I just want to start there, kind of a surface level question for everyone, and then we'll dig into some of this stuff in the chat. But since obviously you're speaking to us today, just like me, we're all living and breathing this, but we're all the time around other educators who aren't as much on the front lines about how they are talking or teaching about it. Just wondering, like, what is it that you've seen in your office or in your schools with your own staff and faculty with regards to this, and how, if anything, are you able to influence other educators to lead lessons, or to even have a conversation about it? And I guess, what is it for you that first got you to be in that spot too? It's open to anyone that.
So I'll start.
Yeah.
I know that it was kind of challenging to embark in this because, I mean, we're in a very charged political climate right now too,
Right.
where people, have one opinion or another about climate change, especially with education. And I was lucky because I had supportive administration who, when the makerspace opened, they said like, hey, we want it to have a sustainability focus. But with that, especially elementary, middle, high school, there's a website called The World's Largest Lesson, and goal number 13 is climate action. And it's a collaborative effort from teachers and educators and students around the world who work together on projects through the Goals Project, through a lot of different things to support one another. And sometimes you like need that encouragement because there are people in your building who question why you're doing this. But I know personally, like I've gone to other teachers in the building and hosted micro PDs with the content connections to the different areas that they're already doing in class, and to be like, hey, it doesn't have to be this politically charged thing. It doesn't have to be solely science-based, but here are just some quick ideas, resources, how you can integrate it into your room, because honestly, it's already being talked about in the world and the students they have questions.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could jump in, I absolutely agree. Students are asking a lot of questions, and that is how I started teaching the climate elective. So I started with earth science and love the earth science curriculum, but my beef with earth science is that it is very like mile wide, inch deep. So we did have a section where we talked about climate change, but it was very brief. And I found that students were very curious and wanted to go deeper. And unfortunately, we just didn't have time. So that got frustrating for me after a while. I'm sure it was frustrating for the students. And so I went to my administration and, proposed a climate elective. My administration's super supportive. They were like immediately yes. And so that's how that started. So like I said, I'm in my third year now of doing that. And the first year, it was mostly on like a interest level. If students said that they were interested as a senior, they would be placed in that class. And then my assistant principal really liked what was going on in the class. And she said, this is such a crucial topic that I think everybody needs to take this course. So then the second year, everybody, all the seniors, at least for the first semester, started being scheduled for the climate change course, which kind of threw in a different dynamic because now it wasn't just kids that were like really about like climate action. It was, we had a lot of kids that are feeling disengaged from issues of climate change, a lot of kids that are skeptical. But that's kind of the fun part for me. I like to draw them in and show them like Yale University has like a bunch of different interactive maps on climate perspective. And so we actually worked with that today. And even some kids that originally said that they were disengaged, they were sharing out something that they learned from one of the visuals that they chose to explore. What I would like to do, like moving forward, like I said, is just kind of build on that and get more involved with community action.
Thanks, Sean. And Carrie. There was a comment that was just made that I think everyone should address. It was that, and I think it's not really necessarily true, but it's like too bad that these have to be special programs and maker spaces and electives. Yes, Sean, you are teaching a climate change elective. Yes, Carrie, you have a maker space. But I know what you're doing with your approach is much more than that. I mean, you just spoke about the standards from your other science class, but even Meredith or Oren could chime in on this about how really it's twofold from what I see happening here. And these examples were hitting on those. But first of all, we know from Oren's research, but also just generally, like we have to tether climate education to more than science and have to get it outside of that core linear viewpoint because climate does touch all subjects. So I think if someone could speak to that, but also just speaking to about a school that may not have the maker space or may not have the opportunity to have the elective, how can they connect to this?
Hi, I can. Hi.
Oh, hi.
Hi, I've been the sustainability coordinator at my school. We're in Brighton Beach. We're PS 225. I've been sustainability coordinator for, I don't know, over 20 years. And
Awesome.
Today I had to do coverages. I basically do ESL K to 2. Whenever I cover classes, I do environment throughout everything. Whatever the teachers are doing, I throw in any way, in any form, whatever the topics are. I do great with Earth Week. I have huge support. I send resources. I have teachers that are so happy. The science teachers are thrilled because they are burdened with their topics. So I'm like the third appendage. So I'm proud today. I took a 7th grade class. I haven't taught 7th grade anything in I don't know how many years. They pushed me in. It was a lovely class. It was ELA and writing. And after yesterday's panel, I said, you know what, I'm going to have them analyze something. And it's hard when you get thrown in. I've been barely in a week to know where everything is. And I have everything in my apartment. I'm like, oh God, I know where it is. But I jumped into this climate change video. I figured out on the Prometheus for the first time how to even get into the Google. And I got this video. There was not a sound in the class that said, why is this important? It had the definition of climate change. So I'm on my way. And I know, and when I had my 2nd grade, we did Cahoots. We did a lot of sustainability questions. I had a small virtual green team. I had it online on the Jamboard. So I'm going to continue with that. And I'm very blessed, and we have no makers, nothing. It's a one-woman
Right.
Amy Feingold show.
Amy, they need your enthusiasm across the system. It's amazing. Thank
Meredith
you.
knows that I'm a
Yeah.
big fan of all of this, and
Yeah.
I think I can't do it. I'm not going to be able to do it, and the kids were so rapt. They're like, oh my God, you have to go to your next class. So I would have continued with it. I probably would have had them do like a role play because I know there's some resources. I'm like, oh my God, it's all coming back to me. So it's getting there. I'm still trying to figure out what I did online and move it to the real world. It's very hard, and I don't know. Things are changing rapidly, but this was great. So I'm going to continue with it all week, and I'm just going to keep. It's going to be part of my Earth Day. It's going to be right in there. So it's just great.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
That's what we need right there.
I know.
That's right.
I love all the work that you're doing. Sean, I got to get into your Padlet. I want to like that. It's going to be perfect for my students with food. That was great.
Oh yeah.
If you send me the link somehow on by phone or something, I have my Padlet open, but I can't find it to like it.
Okay, let me get that.
Hook a girl up.
Yeah, definitely.
You know?
Hey, Oren, I believe you were about to just make a point.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Meredith.
I was going to say something. I am so amazed by everything that's being said. It's just, I think it's so wonderful that the essential topic is being talked about, because this is the topic of our generation. Can you hear me?
Yes, Allison.
And I have to tell you that I'm living it. Last week, I was talking to FEMA because my basement was destroyed. And all of my teaching materials and everything that I considered important in my life, all of my books, my music, the most essential things that kind of add to, the spirit that, life can give. And so I am amazed that now I'm, I didn't expect to be a part of this directly, but I'm so enthusiastic. And I really have to say it's an amazing conversation for me personally to hear this level of enthusiasm. It is current events. We must be doing more in terms of this topic. And it is so applicable on so many levels to so many subject areas. So I just want to tell you that totally enthusiastic to hear the topic being talked about. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Oren, were you going to say something?
I was about to defer to Meredith because usually she has better things to say than I do.
No, well, that's not true, Oren, but thank you. That's very nice of you, but I would contest that statement. A lot of really good points have been made. Just want to emphasize a couple. So Sean had mentioned, and I really feel also very strongly about this. He mentioned really the need to humanize data. Yes, right? How do we humanize data impacts? There are so many wild things. One situation Allison just mentioned, her basement flooding. Everybody is starting, if they haven't already had a visceral personal experience with this in one way or another, they will. They also just might not realize it yet. And so how can we, in a way that is productive, how can we build engagement in sustainability and climate so that more teachers and more educators and that more students understand that sustainability and climate action and education can be a lens for doing all of these other wonderful things. Like we have to talk about social justice. We have to. This stuff has to be included. It's not a separate conversation. It all needs to be a part of a single conversation. And I think more people are realizing that, more people are strategizing accordingly. We need that to continue. Social justice, how do we have civics? People are trying to figure out how they're able to be more active in their communities, in their actual societies. How can education and action in these things really be the thing that catalyzes it? So, it's not to mention that the math, arts, all of these other things, if we are not integrating not only all these subject areas, but really areas of interest more largely, that's how we are going to appeal to more and more folks, no matter where they're from, no matter what age. We just have to put it to work in a way that's accessible and that makes sense. Teaching, learning, very important things. Also, I think represented here pretty robustly is the fact that this is really all best going to happen through our youth. We can teach, we can all learn, but if we're not really engaging youth, like this is going to happen through youth, let's help them to get there.
So if I may jump here for a second, I moderated the panel yesterday where we had two amazing youth activists. And I encourage everybody to watch the recording from yesterday and to read the statements. And then we had an amazing partner from the DOE, Eliza and Erica on my team that presented what they're doing. And one of the things that was very clear is that the youth climate activists are not asking educators to teach them more about the science of climate. What they want is two things. They want to have a seat at the table on what exactly schools are going to do to prepare them for a future of uncertainty with climate issues. And they want to have a voice on what is being taught and how and why. And I think that's the main message from yesterday's panel. Kids want to be part of the discussion of what kind of education we are offering them. So I encourage everybody to listen to what they said yesterday. It's really connected to what we are having here today. I do want to mention one more thing, and it's the larger education policy sphere. I know my colleagues at the DOE can't really speak to that, but we have to revise and rethink some of the practices we have around assessments. Because assessment and testing, standardized testing, are taking away so much energy from schools that they prevent teachers from doing this amazing work that Carrie and Sean and Amy and others are doing. So we can't really separate the conversation. We have to talk about policy. It's not only about policy on climate education. It's the education policy broadly that really affect and limit the energy that teachers and youth bring with them to schools. So I just want us to remember that. And if I may, Thad, to suggest a pivot to another question that came a couple of times in the chat, it's about the emotional work. Climate change is an emotional topic and we have to acknowledge it. Students come with the emotions, we come with our emotions. I'm a father, I have a 3-year-old son. I can't stop thinking about that. What kind of world we brought little Barak to? So I want us maybe to hear from the educators, Carrie and Sean, and Meredith as well, because I'm sure emotions comes in the PD with teachers as well. How do we deal with that? Sean, I'll ask you first.
Okay. Yeah, so I validate whatever the student is feeling, and I try to make sure that I say, I am not judging you. I want you to be honest about how you feel, what your perspective is. Like, we will work with where you're at, because some of my students, like I said, my students, they are a range on the emotional scale, and I tell them, I can't tell you how to feel. You're not wrong for feeling how you feel. Some students expressed that they were very frustrated because they feel like this problem was kind of just passed down to them. And I had to agree. I said, I don't have anything to say to argue against that, and you are right in feeling frustrated. But also, I try to make sure that they leave feeling empowered. We can sit in that feeling for a minute, but then we also have to see like there is work that is being done. There's more work that needs to be done, and that can be done, and that they can be an active participant in that.
Oh yes, I very much agree with that, Sean, because I mean, especially with the younger ones, it can be very scary and overwhelming for them, especially if they've never really breached the topic of climate change outside of it. And then you're telling them like, this is happening to the world. And they're like, oh my God, you know, but giving them the space is so important. As you said, validating the feelings. One thing that we try to do too is kind of going back to Oren and Meredith and thinking about like what in our school community has changed because of it and what they can do like in those beginning steps. Like very, very simple. The kids go mining for fossil fuels and chocolate chip cookies. And then they start to realize like, okay, what is a fossil fuel? How do we use them? And now we have like Power Down Fridays in our school. And it's like a very baby step, but it's starting to make them feel like they're actually doing something and spanning those behaviors further. And then we also try to think about like what around the world, like looking for the good, what are people doing to contribute to mitigating the effects of climate change, and even using like technology and makers and their knowledge for good, and how like we've even formed these really strong relationships with people from around the world through some of our projects to show like this is a global effort and there is really, as much despair as there can be, there is hope as long as we continue to progress forward.
The good news is that, and this might be a bold statement, but I would say I've worked in sustainability for a while now. I've worked in school sustainability for a while now. I have never seen something activate people, no matter what age, whether it's a child or a seasoned professional down the track. Climate, the discussion around climate has a way of really reaching people kind of like where they are, whatever that is, that I haven't seen such an activator ever. So there's been more happening in the last 2 years than I've ever seen happen before. There are more efforts dispersed in a number of different places and ways than I've ever seen. So I think we're all starting to see not just little isolated glimpses of these efforts now. We're starting to see like students coming together being, like what Oren was saying, we need a seat at the table. So how are you going to provide that? And that's really what it is. It's no longer like, let's talk about climate occasionally in a classroom. No, it's, yes, we have to do that. How can we also support like the whole child? It isn't just some children, sometimes in some subjects. It's how are we talking and addressing the whole child, every child. And I'm a believer that climate education can be a way to do that. So it's a lot of it's doom and gloom. There's a lot of good stuff happening. There's a lot of career opportunities for students. There's a lot of professional development opportunities for professionals. And so really it's a great catalyst for teaching, learning, and again, change. So I've been kind of saying that, but it's like I feel it emphatically in my bones, and like the whole goal here is coming together is to be able to talk about that, share in the experiences, but also say to ourselves and each other, okay, what's next? Because we can't ever stop that.
Thank you, Meredith. One question just came in, I think it's a good one, and then we will move towards wrapping up. But how do you support educators who don't feel like they know enough about climate change to incorporate into their work? I think it's a great one for anyone. Where do you begin?
Can I jump quickly?
Yeah.
And then I would like to hear from Carrie and Sean and Meredith as well, so I'll be very short. Our center, the Center for Sustainable Futures, just go to tc.edu/sustainability. You will find, I'll post the links on the chat as soon as I'm done. You will find a set of resources that we collected on climate change and climate change education, including webinars with top scientists at Columbia, who are speaking in a language that everybody can consume and understand. It's an art. So I will share that link. Please go to our website. I'll share my email. Reach out to us. I'm more than happy to bring you with, to connect you with other sources. I will just make a quick plug that next week we are hosting another webinar with a new NGO called Subject to Climate. And what they did is they took curricular resources from 20 vendors, including NASA and NOAA and the Museum of Natural History, and they put it in one database so everybody can find a lesson plan or curriculum materials on climate, regardless of the topic they're using. So I'm going to put that in the chat as we wrap up.
And I will just say before Carrie and Sean, that was really that question, how do we reach others, was probably the primary reason for the start of our climate education leadership team. We don't necessarily know. How do we work with the people who are the experts, our teachers? They're the experts. How can we kind of tap into that? Again, create the time and space, and a safe space at that, and kind of say, let's think about this. How are we going to kind of take this microcosm of interest and experience, and how can we grow it to the teachers that they have never talked about climate, might not be super interested, it might be very intimidated to do so. How can we kind of get past that? Because the truth is, like, there is no silver bullet for that. That is what we are trying to work through ourselves as a group, and kind of better to do it as a group with people who do it as often as they can, and to really try to put those minds together to try to come up with some options, some resources, some strategies to kind of map that out. Because no one really knows the answer yet, but we have to is really the main point. We have to talk to people who have no preparation, have no knowledge to do so. We are trying to move past that ourselves.
I think also going off of what we were saying before about giving students a safe place to feel empowered and to learn about this and discuss climate change, we also need to do so without judgment for other educators. Because I know personally, before I went back to school for this, and even after I went back to school for this, I started this role and was like, oh my gosh, I'm the person who doesn't know anything here. And just showing up is really important too, and really making that a key point to it. Like, okay, you may not know everything about climate change, but you taking that first step to say like you want to integrate it, or even that you care or want to learn more, is really important. I know that I've gotten a lot of really great resources from Climate Generation, from Climate Kids NASA, from the Department of Sustainability, the Office of Sustainability. Their resource portal has been amazing to start us off, and their PDs too. And then you'd be surprised at how many organizations and nonprofits in your area you can just reach out to learn about what's happening in the community. I know DEP, Solar One, Grow NYC here. People are really awesome to talk to as well. If you're willing to just learn, and I know that's difficult sometimes to take a step back. We're all the worst at it, but also just, taking that one step and leading that conversation. So whether that be in your school during the after school PD hours, or during a lunch and learn session, or just like reaching out to other people in your building and be like, hey, let's talk.
Yeah, I completely agree. And just to quickly echo Carrie and Meredith. So one of the things that I was working on as a member of the climate education leadership team is basically going through the scope and sequence for New York City science high schools and finding areas where you can connect, make climate connections. And we actually like put those in as footnotes into the document. So it's like easy point and click for teachers who teach science, outside of the earth sciences, really like chemistry, living environment, physics. Where and how does climate fit into my curriculum? And another thing that I would say is that Subject to Climate, I think Oren, you had mentioned that. Excellent resource, super user-friendly, and just like all different levels. So even if there's something that is like someone who's not really understanding climate change like that,
you can find something that will meet them at their level.
Thanks, Sean. Last thing, it's a quick one just to wrap up. What is it that gives you all hope or inspiration with climate education?
I think seeing the support around the topic, as Meredith was saying before, like you see so much more action now, which is really great. And it's not this, solitary lesson anymore in a school or just in life in general, either that there really is this force behind it, that it's becoming more of like our everyday lives, something that we need to address. And you're seeing so many different groups come together from different backgrounds, different education levels, different professions, to all see what they can contribute to it. And I think that's really powerful too. The positive person in me loves that.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful to see particularly youth activism. And I feel like recently there's been more of a spotlight on that and more of an interest in that. So to see that even, no matter the age, you can really like take leadership in this. It wasn't like that when I was in school. So to see that now is definitely a source of inspiration.
For me, it's the connection with others. The fact that there are more and more people that I can spend an afternoon with them. We've been like on this call for 75 minutes with 50, 60 people that are like-minded and are willing to do this. This is great. So for me, this is where the energy comes from.
Yeah, and I would say I'm very much fueled by the same, by what Oren was mentioning, but I'm really also, I know that I personally, and I think I can speak safely for Thad as well, one of the greatest like pinnacles really for both of us in our lives, not just professional lives, it has really been working with this climate ed leadership team, Carrie and Sean included. We've learned so much from them, and there's almost a staggering amount to still learn. It's kind of like, oh my goodness. But it can all seem very overwhelming. The only way that it seems less overwhelming and like, okay, we can kind of figure this out. Let's at least take step one. Let's try to then take step two. We're not going to have everything all figured out right this minute, but we can start taking some seriously progressive steps in the right direction. And that is that, and the youth leadership stuff. I'm telling you, that's why I get up in the morning and I'm like, I love my job because I get to do it with folks like this.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, Sean, Carrie, Oren, and to everyone that joined us virtually. We appreciate your comments. They're great questions. You've inspired us. We hope we've inspired you. And it's a pleasure to be a part of this discussion today. And we hope to keep in touch. And thank you for joining us on a busy Climate Week NYC.